Well, so this afternoon, former President John Dramani Mahama has actually tabled 13 proposals which the opposition National Democratic Congress believes will transform Ghana's economy. Now, the NDC claims that the country is currently at a crossroads, requiring drastic measures to fix this crisis. So what exactly are the proposals from the NDC? You have that on your screens right now, indicating the concerns of the National Democratic Congress and what the means by which they feel we can address all of these challenges. So you have the first point there, indicating clearly that those who are directly responsible for the economic crisis must bear responsibility. And he goes on, and I'm talking about the former President John Dramani Mahama, going on to say that it is inconceivable that the Minister for Finance remains at post, having presided over the worst economic meltdown in Ghana's history. Now, he then goes ahead to talk about a second point, point two, talking about the fact that it goes without saying that the economic management team has failed and must be reconstituted immediately. So part of the solution is that the NDC is asking that we reconstitute the economic management team, which includes, obviously, the Vice President of the Republic. We'll be hearing from the Vice President shortly, but there's a need to get an understanding, some more of what the demands the NDC is making. So point one, they were calling for the resignation of the finance minister. They're making a point here on the second page, indicating that the economic management team needs to be reformed. Then you also need to take a look at the third point they're making here, and which is a very critical point. The president, as they are talking about, must, as a matter of urgency, reshuffle his cabinet. So that's point three. First of all, try as much as possible to change and bring in a new finance minister. Next point is for a change in the economic management team. It's part of the demands they're making. The third point they're making here also, which some experts believe is far-fetched, and yet the NDC believes is part of the solution, has got to do with the cabinet of the president. That's his discretion, but the NDC believes that there's a need for government, or the president by extension, to make some changes. And they're making that case because the NDC believes that after 5 years, more than 5 years, of an administration without a major cabinet reshuffle, it has actually calcified the management of the ministries, departments, and agencies, and which you heard the former president talk about yesterday on the Joy News channel, that is making some persons feel untouchable, and that is affecting governance in the opinion of the National Democratic Congress. But that's just point three. They're equally making a case that the seriousness of the economic meltdown must compel government to unveil a clear and a workable course of action emanating from broad-based thinking. And then they go on to say that there must be consultations as well, rather than the current state of denial and wrong attribution. So they feel that government has not diagnosed the problems of the economy properly here at point four, which is part of the total point of 13 key issues that the NDC is raising about Ghana being at the crossroads. But the point five is also something that we need to take a look at. John Dramani Mahama is indicating that there must be a clear and a measurable reduction in government expenditure. Well, some say that has been addressed, but we're not too clear in how government will do that going forward. We've had some measures in terms of dealing with the government cuts by some 30%. We know that there'll be a reduction in the payment for some government appointees, but the NDC still wants more. And that's what John Mahama has been indicating here, talking about a need for a significant cut in the expenditure of government. Then he goes ahead to say that even though this is not an easy course of action, it is necessary one nonetheless. And he goes to talk about the fact that there must be zero financing, which happened somewhere way back in 2016 from the central bank. So this is also part of the demands that the NDC is making. We'll be hearing more from the NDC on this matter, but we also need to talk about point six very briefly. They go on to say that related to this, government must drastically cut and trim down the size, rationalize and bring to reasonable levels the pay packages of state-owned enterprises and all of that, the appointees and those working for this current government. Has that been addressed? Some would say yes, because obviously government has announced clearly the reduction in the salaries of some workers within government and some appointees, political appointees as well. So what else is the NDC demanding in that regard. We would explore all of that shortly. But point 7 is also very crucial. They talk about government limiting borrowing significantly. And this was one of the heated debates that the NDC engaged in during the 2020 elections as well with the governing New Patriotic Party, because this was a party that said they are transforming and moving away from relying heavily on debt and moving into a production-based economy. We haven't seen that happen exponentially because the experts are still questioning why government is going back to rely on aid. And in fact, as we speak, that has been the debate in the recent times. So the NDC believes that one of the ways of dealing with that is to limit borrowing significantly. They believe that we need to do that as a matter of urgency, and all concessionary borrowings, we need to avoid that, which would ultimately benefit how we manage our debt profile as a nation. We have crossed that threshold of being debt distressed. By all standards, you shouldn't cross 70% to your GDP, but we've crossed that as well. So that is where we are in terms of our economic situation. But then we'll have to come to point 8, which the NDC talks about. Point 8 is here, and it talks about the fact that while implementing these measures, government must adequately signal to the international financial providers a clear effort at meeting future obligations. So that has got to do with the external markets, our ratings, our credibility. They believe that government must paint a true picture to the international community and our donor community as well, so they know clearly what our commitments are. But point 9 is also here. Point 10, we have to skip 9 and talk about 10, because in addition, the NDC is making a case that government must clarify reports which are rife in the investor community, which is related to the point that we're raising earlier about how government is not painting a true picture of the Ghanaian economy. It's part of the arguments that the NDC is also making. So the last 3, quickly, before we get on to the lines and hear from the NDC on this, the NDC is equally making a point that it is obvious that the assumptions underlying the projections in the 2022 budget, especially regarding the revenue, are overambitious and unlikely to be achieved. So government must set realizable targets. They must set targets that they will be able to achieve easily. That's part of the argument that the NDC is making. And finally, they talk about the fact that it's time to change the structure of our economy. And then the very, very last one, which we have on the proposal here, is the fact that we must leverage on our comparative advantage in agriculture. That's a key point that John Dramani Mahama is making. The fact that we need to invest much more into the agricultural sector and then realize the full benefits that we have. But how does the NDC want this very measures implemented by this government? We'll explore that shortly. But there is also an issue which I call the very last point about the NDC's address last night, which has got to do with the controversial subject of the electronic transaction levy. John Mahama says if the NDC wins power in 2024, they will repeal that controversial revenue measure.
Desperation to tax Ghanaians to get this nation out of the hellhole it has dumped us will not succeed because government's own budget proposals show that the e-levy will not make any significant contribution in resolving our problems, but will exert an adverse toll on the people of Ghana. Let's say, for example, a worker gets paid in his electronic wallet. His pay as you earn tax has been deducted already. For every transfer or purchase above 100 cedis he makes on his e-wallet, he has to pay an additional 1.5% multiple times anytime he uses his mobile money payment. It will now be tempting for such a person to draw cash from his e-wallet and make those payments for his groceries, his fuel, entertainment, utility bills, all with cash, because then he will avoid paying 1.5% on every payment he makes. The collection of the e-levy began yesterday. And like a slap in the face, it began on May Day, when we are supposed to be celebrating workers, we are celebrating a new tax imposed on them. And already there's a litany of complaints about the implementation. I've heard complaints of transfers of under 100 cedis being subject to tax contrary to the law. And I've heard others say that they sent 1,000 cedis and paid no additional tax. Clearly, the Ghana Revenue Authority and those responsible for this tax were not ready for its implementation. Government's desperation to tax Ghanaians to get this nation out of the hellhole it has dumped us will not succeed because government's own budget proposals show that the e-levy will not make any significant contribution in resolving our problems, but will exert an adverse toll on the people of Ghana. We in the NDC do not oppose taxation as a principle. We will not be pretentious and couch fanciful slogans to condemn the principle of taxation like the MPP did in the past. We are, however, implacably opposed to distortionary and burdensome taxes like the e-levy that only force Ghanaians to endure more suffering. A new National Democratic Congress government, God willing, and with the votes of the sovereign people of Ghana in 2025, will repeal the e-levy act.